The first half of 2021, there was a substantial amount of optimism about the U.S. economy. Many people believed that the pandemic would soon be behind us and that a new era of great prosperity would soon be upon us. But now that optimism that we witnessed is fading as Americans become increasingly concerned about inflation, shortages, rising debt levels, and government officials care more about the 1.5 billion people in China over the 330 million people in the United States. So our leaders created, borrowed, and spent trillions upon trillions of dollars in a desperate attempt to get our economy back on track. And it turns out that all of that money didn't really have the enormous impact that they had hoped for. So on the other hand, inflation is now beginning to spiral out of control, and many are comparing this time in our history to Mr. Jimmy Carter, the Mr. Jimmy Carter era of the 1970s. So in this video, I'd like to compare the pre-pandemic economy versus the economy today. So as you might expect from the data, it appears that a tremendous amount of long-term damage has been done. Let's start by talking about employment. It's interesting. It's kind of a good vertical to start with. So look at this graph. Just before the pandemic hit, 152 million Americans were employed, but today only 145 million Americans are currently employed. That's just on paper. So remember, part-time employment is counted as well. And how many of those jobs are six-figure jobs? So many economists are telling us that it will probably take a number of years, maybe 5, 8 years, for the employment to return to pre-pandemic levels. But that also assumes that we will not be facing another major economic downturn in the near future. That's definitely going to happen. So needless to say, I do not share the rosy assessment of the government 100%. So the number of Americans that are not considered to be not in the labor force has also returned to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, take a look at this graph. Just before the pandemic, 95 million Americans were considered to be not in the labor force. But now that number is up to more than 100 million. So we are being told that unemployment is low in this country, even though more than 100 million people do not have jobs right now. 100 million plus not working. Now, people retire, baby boomers, these things. I understand that, but it's concerning. According to John Williams of Shadow Stats, if honest numbers were being used, the unemployment rate would currently be above 25%. The good news is that at least we are not at 35% like we were during the peak of the pandemic. So our politicians realized that things were really, really bad in 2020, and so they started spending money at a rate that we have never seen before. I mean, look at this madness. All of this spending, pushing our national debt from 23 trillion prior to the pandemic to more than 28 trillion today, over 30. So this is complete and utter insanity, but at least our politicians have been more restrained than the Federal Reserve has been. During this pandemic, the size of the federal balance sheet has nearly doubled. And it was sitting at about $4 trillion just before the pandemic, and it's grown to more than $8 trillion today. So economic malpractice is why, is probably too soft a term to describe what the Fed has been doing. If the American people truly understand the Fed and what it has been doing to our currency, there would be a wild protest in the streets maybe tomorrow morning. Collectively, our politicians and the Federal Reserve have pushed the size of our money supply to pretty dizzying heights. Just before the pandemic, the M2 was sitting at about roughly $15 trillion, and now it's crossed the $20 trillion threshold. Anyone that believed that we could do this without causing rip-roaring inflation was just being absolutely delusional. So just look at what has been happening to home prices. Love to talk about that. They have been rising at the fastest pace ever recorded, and families all over America are feeling some pain. They can't play in the game. So the median price for an existing home in June hit an all-time high of about $363,300, up 23% over last year. This marks 112 straight months of year-over-year gains. Needless to say, the vast majority of Americans have not had their paychecks increase by 23% over the past year. So the gap between the ultra wealthy and the rest just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the middle class is shrinking a little bit more with each passing month. I care about the middle class. As I've talked about in the past, they're very important to the economy. So what can be done? These days we also have widespread shortages to deal with. Prior to the pandemic, I don't remember ever hearing about any major shortages, but now they are all around us. In particular, the chip shortage has been increasingly painful for a lot of Americans, and the CEO of Intel is now telling us that it could last into 2023. One of the leading voices in the semiconductor industry sees the chip supply problem stretching as far as 2023 into 2024. So it could take 1 or 2 years to get back to a reasonable supply and demand balance in the semiconductor industry. Intel CEO Pat said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal after the company posted second quarter earnings on Thursday. So he said, we have a long way to go yet, and he said it just takes a long time to build manufacturing capacity. So at first, a lot of Americans believed our leaders when they were told that wonderful days were just around the corner. But now reality is starting to set in. Faith in the recovery is fading, and at this point, more than half of all Americans believe that the economy is in poor shape. So fewer than half of the Americans, roughly 45%, judge the economy to be in good shape, while 54% say it's in poor shape, according to a poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. So views are similar to what they were in the AP polls in June and in March, despite increasing in vaccinations and the flow of aid from Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. If most Americans are, dissatisfied with the economy today, how will they be feeling if the economic conditions are even worse 6 months from now? So, in my opinion, we should be very thankful that the economic conditions have been relatively stable in recent months, because the long-term outlook for our economy is not good at all. And inflation is just one indicator. So our leaders are literally in the process of committing national financial suicide, and the whole world will be affected since we produce the reserve currency, that the entire planet depends on. So I would say enjoy these relatively good times while we still can, but because eventually they will be gone for good. We need leaders on both sides to come up with creative solutions and come together. They know what needs to be done. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but I'm not going to get into the science. I don't want to get political on any of this stuff, but we have leaders that said the lockdowns were wrong. The first time around, they should have been handled differently, and now they're thinking about locking things down again. Gavin Newsom in the state of California is up for re-election September 14th. So the talk of the town here is that they're not going to do anything about lockdowns until after that's taken care of. But both sides are politicizing this pandemic, and I think it's a terrible thing, because some people have been affected by this and they are dying, and you're playing with people's lives, and people are getting mixed messages on vaccines and variants, and it's very confusing for a lot of people, and you have to dig into the weeds. I personally speak to doctors that are involved in some high-level positions, and that gives me some peace of mind. But it's very confusing right now in the amount of spending we're doing in printing. I know there's people on one side of the fence say, we'll just write all that off, just keep printing. No big deal, but it is a big deal. And, we can't keep going down this road. And inflation's been an indicator for roughly over a year. I've been talking about it. And, it's good times right now. Money's running out. We're the world reserve currency. But things could get a lot worse very quickly. And if you delve into the M2 and look at other indicators in the analytics, it's very concerning. So you're going to have to be creative from an investment strategy point of view. And we also have the rental moratorium ending. Supreme Court got involved, or not. It is going to end, which I think is a good thing. But that's going to cause some other issues, and we have a forbearance issue in the housing market as well. So there's a lot of things, moving parts right now, and triggers that could blow up the economy. And these people need to come together and very delicately, with cool heads, solve some of these problems. Thanks for your time. Take care. Be creative.